Hello TBR, this is Porter. Today I'm going to talk about flop subsets, using those subsets in GTO Plus to build databases. I'm going to show two databases that I solved for specific formations, two different formations, two different databases. And I'll talk about the features and uses of these databases and how you can export some of that information generated by GTO Plus into Excel or another spreadsheet program and examine it there. Flop subsets are what it says right here, a subset of flops that are supposed to represent the entire possible flops, all possible flops, a smaller set that represents the whole. So the whole being 1,755 different flops. Those have been narrowed down to these subsets here, 25, somewhere between 25 and 184. I'll include the link to this page because I think the explanation of how the subsets were arrived at is interesting. Also, they have the links to the subsets themselves, which are just text files. You can't import these text files directly into GTO Plus without deleting this little trailing digit and colon. But I've got a 25 flop subset and a 95 flop subset where I've already deleted that information. You can import those directly into GTO Plus. So I'll include those in the shared directory. So next is how do you use this information in GTO Plus to build a database? The DLF covered building a database in his instructional videos, but he didn't really discuss flop subsets. So I'll just go over really quick how to build a database, how to get to the point where you can import these subsets. So here you would start by inputting ranges, range 1 and range 2 as usual. You need to select a board here, even though we'll end up using an entire database of boards. You still need to select a board here to get to the next step. You build your tree with your starting pot, effective stacks, and you decide on your bet sizing options over here, however you want to do it. I've got some preset ones that I'm using here. You build your tree, and then you go to run solver. So this is the first part really that's different from a normal setup is you click on advanced, and then you'll likely need to click on this activate database mode. And let's see, I'm going to clear this database so it'll look like this when you get to this step. You can add random flops, you can add specific flops, maybe you have a list of similar flops that you want to compare, you could use this, or you can import flops from a file like a subset. So that's what I've got in here. This is my 25 flop subset. Import it. Now it's got all of these listed here, all these possible boards. So these are all unsolved. So now at this point you would click on process database and it will solve all of these. The length of time it's going to take to do that will depend on a bunch of factors: the width of the ranges you're using, the complexity of the game tree you input. If stacks are really deep, that's going to make it take longer. If you give each player 5 bet sizes on every street, that's going to make it take a lot longer. The speed of the processor in your computer. So it could take, for 25 flops, it could take, or boards, it could take anywhere from, maybe a half hour to, maybe overnight, depending on those factors. So once you've solved all of these, it will look something like this. And you click on this graph here, this graph button, and it will take you to this screen here. So now it's got all of the boards that it's solved. In this file here, this is a 95 flop subset that I've solved for cutoff open, big blind defend. I think this is a range that I adapted from Upswing, and this is a cutoff range that I'm using. So this shows player one's equity and EV on all boards. You can sort it by either one. You could sort it like this, and you can see that big blind is realizing less equity than it should, basically, because it's out of position and it has a capped range. Um, but so the cooler feature of this is when we go over to player two, now you've got player two's what the solver is showing the frequencies should be for player two for each of these bet sizings across all boards in this subset. And you can look at the EV, you can compare the EV on boards. So cutoff prefers this board. This is this board that has the highest EV of all boards. And if we go all the way down to the bottom, it's got the lowest EV on this board. It looks like something you would expect. This is a very condensed board that really going to hit the big blinds range. I'm not going to focus too much on strategy here. I just want to talk about all the features. So we can also sort here. This is third pot, half pot, 2/3 pot. So you can see that it's using and this is a graph showing from where it uses third pot the most to where it uses it the least. So it's got all these sizings here that you can compare. You can also click on this button here and it'll generate this. This can be copied and pasted into Excel, and then you can look at it like this and compare boards where it's using each of these sizings. I've taken a couple of these boards and then created separate files where I'm node locking them, looking to see if you can see bet 100% of the time at a particular sizing without losing EV. And I'm just using this Excel sheet to keep track of that. So you might be able to, I don't know if you can node lock within this file. I prefer to keep the node lock files separate and just use this database file to sort of explore things. So the way you would go about doing that is you just find a flop here that you want to look at and double click on it, and then now you would go up here to the tree and you can examine each player's strategy at equilibrium up here. And then if you go back to this little graph icon, you can select another flop if you want here. You can also examine turns. So if we go check, bet, and then do a turn report, looking at all turns, you can see here, one of the things I noticed here is that now for player one, the out of position player, it's showing what frequency the out of position player will now lead on the turn after check calling flop. But if you look at player two, it does not have what frequencies player two is going to bet or raise on these turns. And that's because that option for player two is conditional upon player one's action. So because the solver doesn't know what player one's going to do, or because player one's only going to take these actions a certain percentage of the time, it can't really tell you, well, it bets or raises at a certain frequency. Unless you were to take a specific board and then node lock it or lock the strategy for the out of position player to always check. So you can see on this particular board, this Jack 8-6, it's really only the eights where player one ever leads, and it's very infrequent. So I think I actually did this for a different board here. I did it for 8-4-3. So now on 8-4-3, if we check, range one checks, range two bets, range one calls, and we load a turn report here, and we look at player two, now we've got the bet sizings for player two because player one is always checking. So these frequencies are not conditional upon player one's action. They're pure. And you can do the same thing here where you sort what's the best, what sizings is range two using depending on these turn cards, which cards does it prefer to check, which ones is it betting, which ones does it have the highest EV on. Again, you could export this to Excel and examine each of these turns and create some resources that you use and refer to for study. Uh, Maybe I'll go in depth on that in a later video as I sort of build that up. I haven't done much work with these term reports other than what I showed on the flop sizing Excel spreadsheet that I have. So let's see. I'll look at this other subset database that I've solved here. This is middle position raise call range that I've sort of adapted based on what I think tendencies are, and then protected it with a little bit. I'm not worried about it being incredibly accurate. I'm just trying to get a decent feel for boards here. I don't think each player is going to be different. This is just supposed to be a general idea of the field. And then this is the cutoff 3-bet versus a middle position open range that I'm examining. So this is the database that I've solved. Player 1 doesn't have any options here because it's always checking. We go to player 2 and we get this similar output here where you can look at the sizings. In this tree, I started out with the option to not bet out of position if range 1's been passive so far. So in this tree, or in this, well, let's see. If you get this where all these are equal, what it means is you haven't double-clicked on a flop in the main screen of the database. So if we go back to the database, even though it shows this board here, we haven't clicked on a file or a board in this database, so it's got all these identical frequencies. If you see this, you need to go back to this screen, double click on a board. Now we've got the mixed strategy here. So where I was going with this was, since we've got the don't bet out of position if you've been passive so far checked, we without node locking, as I showed in the previous version here, if we go check, bet, call, and then look at a turn report, player 1 doesn't have any options to lead, and player 2, and this version only has one betting option. I'll have to look at that. I thought there were multiple options for it in this tree. But if there were multiple options here, you could again do the thing that I talked about and export this to Excel to examine there. And so if this actually went check check, then now out of position does have the option to lead, and we could review when it uses each sizing here. It looks like yeah, that's strange. It has multiple options here, but in the tree, okay, this is in the tree here, I didn't give it custom settings for the turn, so it's always using this 2/3 sizing on the turn for both players. I don't know why it shows all these different options here though. That's for player 1. This is player 1. This is player 2. It must be showing the oh, I know why. So this, yeah. So these are all the boards. These are just all the flops. What I did was I went to the wrong screen. So if you go check, and then we wanted to look at the turn report here, then we could look at player 1. This is the frequencies of player 1 betting. I just went to the main screen and not to the specific turn report. So don't make that mistake. So I guess another thing you could do with these subsets is compare preflop ranges across all boards. So if we wanted to look at what is the EV if I call with this range compared to what is the EV if I call with a wider range versus this 3-better, you could examine how that range plays post-flop. What's the EV of that range across all boards compared to the EV of another range? We can look at, you can also click on this option here, and this is, and then click on equity, and then I'll show you the equity of each hand in this range. The one thing it's not going to tell you is what the actual EV of your strategy is. If you're defending a stronger range but you're never four betting, that might be losing you more EV than you're gaining by adding some of those strong hands into your calling range against a three bet. So you're really only examining what is the range, what is the EV of your range and hands from the point of the flop forward, not the EV of your entire strategy. So I'll put all these files in the shared directory along with the subsets, and I'll include a link in the forum post. You can ask me any questions you have about this. Hopefully this explanation made sense and the files are useful. You can, poke around on them. They might not apply, but I still think they're to whatever your games are or whatever trees you're interested in. But I still think there's a lot of interesting stuff in there. It's interesting to compare the boards, look at when it uses certain sizings, look at what the EVs are, and think about why that might be. At least I think it's interesting. So let me know what you think. Thanks.